Just a scratch? You call this just a scratch? The shrill, contemptuous voice pierced the elegant atmosphere of the Monarch Bay Hotel lobby. Everything seemed to freeze. The gentle melody of the piano faltered, and a few guests enjoying their afternoon tea turned their heads with curiosity. The speaker was Victoria Hayes. She stood there, proud in her expensive silk dress, her eyes blazing as she fixated on a tiny mark on her brand new Louis Vuitton suitcase. Across from her, the older woman in a housekeeping uniform remained surprisingly calm. She bowed her head slightly, her voice soft but clear. My sincerest apologies, miss. It must have been lightly bumped during transport. Bumped? Victoria scoffed, cutting her off. Or was it carelessness from people like you? Do you have any idea how many rooms you'd have to clean to afford this? To assert her dominance, Victoria shoved the suitcase hard toward the staff member. The designer luggage slid across the floor, striking the woman's leg and causing her to stumble. In the middle of the crowded lobby, Victoria declared, people like you are only good for ruining guests' belongings. The woman, Eleanor, regained her balance after a brief moment. She didn't argue or make excuses, simply looking directly at Victoria. But in that fleeting instant, her eyes revealed a profound disappointment, a look that went far beyond anger or hurt. Then, she quietly turned, disappearing down a service hallway. Victoria tilted her chin up, a smug smirk playing on her lips. She believed she had just won, solidifying her unassailable status in front of the entire hotel. But her smile vanished when a gentle hand touched her shoulder. Victoria, what did you just do? It was Chloe, Victoria's best friend. She had been standing in a corner and had witnessed the whole thing. Her face was a mask of shock and disappointment. What do you mean, what did I do? Victoria brushed her friend's hand away, her voice still sharp. I was teaching her a lesson about standards. Everything needs to have standards, you know. Standards? Chloe lowered her voice, pulling her friend to a more secluded corner, away from the lingering, curious eyes. You just humiliated a woman old enough to be your mother in the middle of the lobby. You made her almost fall. All for a scratch I have to squint to even see. That's not standards, Vicky. That's cruelty. Victoria crossed her arms, her expression hardening. You don't get it. If I'm not tough, they'll walk all over me. Have you forgotten what happened with Caleb? Weakness only gets you disrespect. Chloe's gaze softened slightly at the mention of that name, but her resolve didn't waver. She took Victoria's hand, looking her straight in the eye. I haven't forgotten, but taking your anger out on innocent people isn't the way to be strong. Listen to me, Victoria. Her voice grew serious and urgent. True class comes from how you treat people, not from the clothes you wear or the five-star hotel you're staying in. Victoria snatched her hand back, a furious gesture, as if Chloe's words had burned her. You're so naive, Chloe. Politeness doesn't earn you respect. Power does. With that, she turned and marched toward the gold-plated elevators, leaving Chloe standing alone in the lobby. Chloe stood frozen, watching her friend's proud silhouette disappear. She sighed, a heavy breath of helplessness and worry. She wondered what Nicholas, Victoria's fiancé, would think if he had seen what just happened. As the gilded elevator doors closed, Victoria leaned against the polished mirror wall. The sudden silence summoned a ghost from her past. Chloe's words were like a needle, piercing an old scar. Victoria always tried to hide a scar named Caleb. It hadn't been a dramatic breakup. It was worse. Caleb, her ex-boyfriend, had quietly left her during a trip after she had insulted his family, a family of vineyard farmers she had always secretly looked down on. The issue wasn't a single word or action. but the deep-seated disdain in her character, what Caleb had called the emptiness behind the glamorous facade. For Victoria, the greatest pain wasn't losing love, but the absolute humiliation of being judged and abandoned by the very people she considered beneath her. The feeling of being looked down upon by country folk had become an obsession. From that day on, a toxic belief took root in her mind. She was abandoned not because she was cruel, but because she wasn't powerful enough. She believed that if she had been wealthier, her status higher, Caleb would never have dared to leave. He and his entire family would have been forced to respect her, to bow to her. In her eyes, kindness had become a weakness, and decency was reserved for failures. The memory of Caleb didn't teach her a lesson in empathy. It reinforced her conviction that only power and wealth were the ultimate shields. They were weapons to ensure that no one ever again could look at her with contempt and leave her so easily. Night fell, transforming the private beach of the Monarch Bay Hotel into a magical stage. Tiki torches flickered, and thousands of string lights woven through the palm trees glittered like a man-made starry sky. At the best table, right by the shore, Nicholas smiled at Victoria, his hand gently squeezing hers on the crisp, white tablecloth. "It's incredible, isn't it?" he said, his voice full of pride. "My mother personally supervised everything to make sure this party was special." Victoria took a sip of wine, her smile radiant under the lights. "It's perfect. Your mother has impeccable taste. Everything has its proper place." She emphasized the last few words. Her wine glass was nearly empty. She glanced around for a server. Just then, an older woman in a pristine white uniform quietly approached their table. Her silver hair was tied in a neat bun, and reading glasses gave her a somewhat stern appearance. It was Eleanor. "Miss, would you care for more wine?" Eleanor asked, her tone even and professional. Victoria didn't look at her, merely holding out her glass. "You should have asked that 5 minutes ago," she said, her voice cold but low enough for only their table to hear. Eleanor showed no reaction, simply taking the glass and heading toward the bar. Nicholas seemed not to notice the small exchange. He was looking toward another group of guests. "Oh, there's Mr. and Mrs. Davenport," he said to Victoria. "I have to go say hello. You'll be all right here for a moment?" "Of course, darling," Victoria smiled sweetly. "Don't keep me waiting too long." Nicholas gave her a light kiss on the cheek and stood up. The moment his figure disappeared behind a palm tree, the smile on Victoria's face vanished. She sat up straight, the sweet patience and regal air dissolving with it. She looked down at the empty plate before her, where the appetizer had been cleared 10 minutes ago. She tapped her long fingers on the table, the rhythm growing faster, betraying her rising impatience. Her eyes scanned the servers moving across the sand. And then she saw Eleanor. She was carefully pouring water for an elderly couple at a nearby table, her movements deliberate, perhaps even a bit slow. To Victoria, it wasn't diligence. It was sluggishness. In her eyes, Eleanor wasn't a respectable woman, but a faulty gear in a perfect machine. And she, the queen of this party, would not tolerate an imperfect machine. Victoria's patience was as thin as a thread. 5 minutes passed, then 7. She watched as plates of fragrant beef Wellington were delivered to surrounding tables, but hers remained empty. The feeling of being overlooked began to boil in her chest, hot and uncomfortable. She saw Eleanor walking toward her, but her hands were empty. That was the last straw. Victoria didn't call out. She snapped her fingers. A sharp, arrogant sound cut through the elegant ambiance. Eleanor stopped short, then quickened her pace to the table. "Yes, miss, how may I help you?" she asked, her voice still calm. Help me? Victoria sneered, a humorless smile on her face. Perhaps by bringing out my main course before this party ends? Or did you think I came here just to admire the ocean? The dish is being prepared now. It will be out in just a few minutes. The kitchen is a bit overwhelmed, Eleanor explained patiently. A few minutes? Victoria repeated, her tone incredulous. To her, it wasn't an explanation, it was a challenge. Clang! A piercing sound rang out as Victoria slammed her knife and fork down on the porcelain plate. The saxophone music stopped. Conversations around them ceased abruptly. Every guest turned to look at her. Seizing the attention, Victoria raised her voice, each word a dagger stabbing into the party's tranquility. Is this a fine dining event or a street food stall? The air grew thick. Eleanor stood frozen before the table, the focus of this public humiliation. But Victoria wasn't finished. A malicious glint appeared in her eyes as she noticed a glass of water on the table. With one swift motion, she picked up the glass and threw its contents directly at Eleanor. Water splashed everywhere. The entire front of Eleanor's white uniform was soaked, clinging to her body. A few cold drops clung to the frames of her glasses. A collective gasp rose from the surrounding tables. Eleanor stood motionless, water still dripping from her hem onto the sand. She didn't wipe her face or step back. She just looked at Victoria. Maybe this will help you wake up a little, Victoria said, her voice now a low, contemptuous whisper. She exhaled, feeling a satisfying surge of power. She believed she had restored order, had taught the slow worker a lesson she would never forget. But then a voice spoke from right behind her. It wasn't loud, but it was as cold and sharp as ice, shattering her satisfaction instantly. What are you doing, Victoria? She whipped around. Nicholas was standing there. No one knew when he had returned, but his eyes made it clear. He had seen everything. His face, which was always warm when he looked at her, was now cold and distant. Nicholas! Victoria was flustered but quickly regained her haughty demeanor. When did you get back? I was just trying to maintain service standards. She was being so slow and... That's enough, Nicholas cut in, not even looking at her. His gaze was fixed on Eleanor, filled with an undisguised apology and respect. He gave her a slight nod, a silent apology on Victoria's behalf. Then he turned back, his steel gray eyes locking onto Victoria's. His voice wasn't an accusation, but a verdict. Victoria, you just embarrassed yourself more than anyone. The words were like an invisible slap, more painful than 1,000 scoldings. Victoria was stunned, the victorious smirk on her face freezing and then crumbling. While the tense confrontation unfolded, at a table not far away, a young female tourist quietly lowered her phone. She had started recording the moment Victoria slammed her cutlery down. The entire scene, from the yelling to the act of throwing water, had been captured in clear detail. Her finger swiped quickly across the screen. A few seconds later, in a group chat named Monarch Bay Holiday Makers, a 30-second video appeared with the caption, "Can't believe the behavior of this guest at the VIP table." From that private group chat, all it took was one share. Someone posted the clip to their Instagram story with the sarcastic headline, "Princess and the Waitress at Monarch Bay Hotel." The clip went viral. In less than half an hour, it was on every social media platform with even more sensational titles, "Dinner Party Queen" or "Monarch Bay Nightmare." Comments of outrage and condemnation exploded. Victoria, still reeling from Nicholas's reaction, was completely unaware that her momentary act of cruelty was no longer a private matter. It had become undeniable evidence, turning her from an admirable fiancée into the focus of a nationwide social media backlash. Nicholas, you don't understand. She turned on Eleanor, her eyes flashing with anger again, looking for someone to blame. It was her. She was provoking me. Where's the manager? I want him to fire this waitress immediately. Nicholas was about to say something, but a hand gently rested on his arm, stopping him. It was Eleanor. She stood there in her soaked uniform, but she looked nothing like a victim. She calmly removed her glasses, wiped away the remaining drops of water, and tucked them into her pocket. When she looked up, without the glasses to hide them, her eyes were revealed sharp and full of authority, the very same eyes as Nicholas. She took a step forward, her voice not loud, but clear and dignified, echoing in the party's silence. You won't have to fire me, Victoria. Victoria froze, confused by the staff member's strange demeanor. Eleanor looked directly into her eyes, and for a moment, Victoria felt as if she were being seen through, down to her very soul. Then the older woman spoke, introducing herself to the entire audience, who were watching with bated breath. I am Eleanor Vance Nicholas's mother. It was as if a bomb had gone off inside Victoria's head. Impossible. A joke. A terrible mistake. Her face turned deathly pale. Eleanor continued, her voice calm, but every word was a hammer blow to Victoria's pride. I disguised myself as a staff member to see how my son's fiancée would treat the people she looks down upon. A hush fell over the beach, broken only by the sound of the waves. Then, like a domino effect, whispers and shocked gasps spread from table to table. All eyes turned to Victoria, no longer with curiosity, but with a mixture of shock, pity, and contempt. The woman she had just publicly humiliated, the person she had dismissed as a lower class, was in fact the most powerful person there, the woman who was to be her mother-in-law. The game Victoria thought she was winning turned out to be nothing more than a test, and she had failed spectacularly. All sound faded away, replaced by a dull ringing in Victoria's ears, Nicholas's mother. The words repeated over and over, crushing every last bit of her pride. The woman she had insulted, the woman she had callously thrown water on, held her entire future in the palm of her hand. Eleanor took another step toward Victoria. Her gaze was no longer that of a waitress, but of a mother, a matriarch. She didn't raise her voice, but her words carried the weight of stone, resonating through the space. A person can stay in the most luxurious hotel, wear the most expensive clothes, she said, her eyes sweeping over Victoria's vibrant red dress, but true nobility lies in how they treat the simplest waiter. That statement was the final verdict. The strength drained from Victoria's body. Her shell of power and arrogance shattered completely. She looked at Nicholas and saw only cold disappointment in his eyes. She looked at the guests around her and saw their looks of pity and scorn. Her world collapsed. Ma'am. A choked sob escaped her throat. Ma'am, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I truly didn't know it was you. Tears began to stream down her face, mixing with her expensive makeup. She collapsed onto the soft sand, reaching out as if to grab hold of Eleanor, a desperate, pathetic gesture. Please forgive me. Please. Eleanor looked down at the weeping girl at her feet, but her expression didn't soften. She didn't step forward to help her up. She just shook her head slowly, a sorrowful motion. You aren't sorry you humiliated a waitress, Eleanor replied, her voice not angry but stating a cold, obvious fact. You are only sorry you found out that waitress was Nicholas's mother. The final sentence was a fatal blow, stripping away the pretense of Victoria's remorse. It exposed a brutal truth. She wasn't crying for her wrongdoing, she was crying for the consequences she was about to face. Without another word, the atmosphere spoke for itself. Nicholas said nothing more to Victoria. He just gave a slight nod to the flustered hotel manager who had rushed over, a signal that it was all over. He bent down, took Victoria's arm, and pulled her to her feet. His grip was no longer gentle, only cold and firm, as if he were handling a broken object. "Come with me," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. They walked away in silence, leaving the ruined beach party behind. All eyes followed them, filled with curiosity and judgment. Victoria kept her head down, feeling, for the first time in her life, a shame so profound she wished she could disappear. Every step on the soft sand felt like walking on hot coals. They entered the elevator, walked down the hall, and into the presidential suite. Click. The sound of the door closing was like a final gunshot, trapping them in a suffocating, tense space. Nicholas let go of her arm. He didn't look at her, walking silently to the large window to stare out at the dark, churning sea. His back was straight and strong, but impossibly distant. His silence was more terrifying than any rage. Victoria stood trembling in the middle of the room. Her arrogant facade had completely crumbled, leaving only raw fear. She knew she was on the verge of losing everything. "Nicholas," she began, her voice hoarse and shaky. Will you just listen to me? I really didn't mean to." He remained silent, his back to her. The silence was suffocating her. Panicked, she stumbled toward him, and then, with no pride left, she sank to the cold floor. Her hands clutched at the hem of his pants, a desperate, demeaning act. "I'm begging you," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "I know I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please give me a chance. Just one last chance. I'll change. I promise." "I'll do anything you want, just please don't leave me. Don't be silent like this." She looked up, her tear-streaked face pleading. "I'll apologize to your mother. I'll kneel before her in front of everyone. I'll do anything to make it right. I love you, Nicholas. Please." Finally, Nicholas turned slowly, looking down at the woman kneeling at his feet. But there was no pity in his eyes, only a deep sadness and an endless exhaustion. Just then, the suite door opened softly. Eleanor entered, followed by Chloe. She had changed out of her wet uniform into a simple but elegant evening gown. Chloe stood behind her, her expression a mix of pity and helplessness as she looked at her friend crumpled on the floor. Victoria looked up and saw them. The last shred of hope inside her disintegrated. She knew this was the court that would decide her fate. Eleanor looked at Victoria, then turned to Nicholas, her son, who was facing a decision more consequential than his entire career. "Forgiveness," Eleanor said, her voice quiet but heavy with meaning, "is meaningless without true internal change." She moved closer to her son, placing a hand on his shoulder, her eyes both stern and loving. "You must remember, Nicholas, the woman you choose as your wife will be the one who raises your children. Her character will be the foundation for the next generation of the Vance family." The words were a final wake-up call, not just for Nicholas, but a dagger to Victoria's heart. She suddenly understood. The problem was never a scratched suitcase or a delayed meal. The problem was who she was as a person. The room fell silent, filled only with Victoria's choked sobs and the sound of the ocean waves outside. Nicholas closed his eyes for a second, then opened them. He gently removed Victoria's hand from his leg and stepped out onto the balcony, letting the sea breeze wash over his tense face. He stared out at the dark ocean, where the white-capped waves crashed against the shore and retreated in an endless cycle. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice hoarse and weary, without turning around. "Mom, what should I do?" Eleanor didn't join him. She stood in the doorway, watching the strong yet lonely figure of her son. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Choose the path that brings peace to our family." She didn't tell him which path was right. She only gave him a compass. Nicholas remained on the balcony, gazing into the vast darkness of the ocean. A spilled glass of water could be dried, an apology could be spoken, but could the cracks in trust and the profound disappointment ever be mended? Would he choose forgiveness and hope for a hollow change, or choose a painful ending in exchange for a peaceful future?